What's the problem with the leverage? I'm very opposed to the idea of a leveraged EFSF. And the reason is because we know about, when we had the credit bubble, we all knew there was some backstop in the system. There were central banks in the system and governments that were ready to pay, to back up, to deal with any sort of huge correlation risks and systemic risks. If this goes wrong, there isn't anyone at the backstop. This is government seeking protection. This is not some private individual seeking something. This is the people who normally provide the backstop who tell you, they want limited liability. This is what Germany has been saying, limited liability. We want to cut our liability to 210 billion. Now, if that liability is exhausted, there isn't any more. The ECB isn't there, the member states are. So this is explicit. There's nothing implicit behind it. The other problem, as I mentioned, what is if one of the EFSF shareholders defaults? What is if one of the EFSF shareholders gets downgraded? This is a huge risk to the structure. A French downgrade is, I don't want to speculate on the likelihood, but it is not something one can exclude in the current system. It is dependent on factors such as next year's economy, a downturn. It is, as S&P said today, a downgrade may happen if actual money flows. At the moment, they're not going to do anything, but the minute anyone has to pay, they'll downgrade. They always downgrade once the balance is already done. So basically, these things can happen. And a fresh downgrade will severely affect the structure. So the system is this leverage structure is prone to an accident, and these accidents may not happen, but it's a risk I would not take because we have certainly no plan to deal with those risks. Now the insurance system is relatively flexible. It is only works for the primary market issues. The CDO is more flexible. It can work in secondary market, the CDO, and that's why they're pursuing, that's why they like the idea of the CDO, because they can do more with it. You can have different tranches of capital, so you can fine-tune it to some things. So from a technical perspective, this is all rather neat. But it's something that I remain very skeptical with, and I don't think that the fundamental problem is that the member states cannot or are not willing to guarantee the eurozone sovereign risk and the banks. That they say this is too much for us individually. That is the fundamental problem, and I don't think no leverage can fundamentally change that. What do I believe are the elements of a sustainable solution for the eurozone? A monetary union, this is what economic history has told us. The monetary union cannot exist sustainably without a fiscal and a financial union. Both need to be established as long-term goals. Now, you don't need the eurozone to solve the crisis. In fact, it will take a long time to establish. It's not something you do overnight. There are legal obstacles to it. I will go into this a little later if we have time. But it took the EU 30 years to establish the euro, from 1970, in the early 70s when the Bretton Woods system collapsed, to the late 1990s. That is the process during which they built the euro. There were setbacks and plans that didn't work. There was the European monetary system, then there was the multi-stage road towards the euro. Now, a similar thing would need to happen for fiscal union. It would take 10 or 20 years. What we need now is not the Eurobond. We need now a political commitment, like the Maastricht Treaty, some agreement, some grand agreement among governments that this is what they want to do, a way they want to explore, a way they want to go the next 20 years. Instead, we have been given the opposite. We have seen the German Chancellor, but others too, saying that this is something they will definitely not do, something they will absolutely reject, something that is illegal, politically impossible. So we're not getting the perspective of some fiscal or financial union in the future, but on the contrary, we're getting the explicit statement that this will and cannot happen. What about Greece? Debt default? I think it is a debt default is necessary. I think we're now in a situation with Greece. We cannot either we forgive that. There's a possibility the eurozone could basically socialize the Greek debt and say we don't want the private sector to default. That's another question whether that's desirable. But there's no way that Greece is sustainable. So that will happen. So for Greece, we need to really go down that road. country, but needs a lot more. Even once the default happened, even if Greece stays inside the eurozone, that is not itself sustainable. Even an 80% debt to GDP ratio would not in itself miraculously, and the austerity plan would not work. So the country needs to have a political social system change of massive proportion. This is something that we haven't seen. The number of things that need to be changed in the administration, in the infrastructure, in all parts of Greek life. There were reports here by a French newspaper that the Greek governments had replaced the head of the Joint Chief of Staff, the heads of the Army, Navy, and Air Force because they had planned a coup. And that is sort of the kind of situation. I have no way of confirming that. But the idea of people have been asking why is Papandreou calling this referendum, and my it looks very much that he had no other choice. That the country is at the brink of a civil war, and that he needs to get a consensus behind those policies. He cannot just push them through by having a majority. He needs to get a broad-based majority for that, or he needs to, or the country goes into a different direction. But that basically tells us that Greece is a country very different to other European countries. There are not many eurozone countries where the likely consequence would be a military coup if a policy was. And that tells us how far Greece still has to go. We need big system change in Italy too. The country has a political crisis. It's not just Berlusconi. This is, you may have to go and should go, but getting rid of Berlusconi will not solve the Italian problem. The country has major productivity issues that it needs to address and hasn't addressed yet. And France needs to do reforms that President Sarkozy had promised in his last election campaign, but not delivered. He did deliver some reforms, but not the ones that really did. That will have to be done now. It's going to be hard. There is no political consensus for it. So it's not that easy to be pessimistic if I wanted to be. I'm not pessimistic about France. I think France will deliver those changes, but they will be hard. So my solution part for this crisis, so this is something I still consider improbable, but I cannot see many other alternatives to that. ECB accepts lender of last resort status, so that it does backstop the EFSF, or maybe its successor, but I think we need to start with this earlier. And the political process in parallel moves towards a fiscal and financial union. Now, I've got to tell you, both of my solutions are illegal. ECB, under the Maastricht Treaty, is not allowed to monetize the debt, and the German Constitutional Court says you cannot have a fiscal union. You have to change the Constitution. Not just change Article 1, 2, 3. You have to change the entire Constitution and get rid of it. So basically, when you come up with solutions to any crisis that basically are so conflict in the law, you've got to ask yourself some very fundamental questions. Is this realistic? But I cannot see any solution that says we muddle through, we have another EFSF or another leveraging. It's pretty desperate. The idea of starting and solving this with CDO essentially is pretty desperate. We must be in a pretty desperate state, saying that a special purpose investment vehicle is my big idea to solve the economic crisis. What's the politics of that? Well, when you ask the Germans, the Dutch, when you accept the fiscal union, will you pay for Greece? They would say, no, of course not. You've got to ask them a different question. You've got to ask them a question, and at the moment that's the question you will ask. By the time you will come, you ask the question, this is the bifurcation point. We'll come to that in 2012, to this point, where we really have to, we can no longer kick the can down the road, because it will have exploded, and there won't be a can left, and we have to go one to the right or the left of that road, and we have to decide. I mean, the question to ask them is, we're going to give up on the eurozone, we'll fragment, we'll have a revaluation in Germany, we'll have all the consequences, we'll have political fragmentation, we have another 50 years of EU integration lost, or partly lost. Or we're going to go for this fiscal union. There will be a cost to that is limited. The fiscal union won't be complete. It won't be a central political state. It will be still a federal state with the center and states, but it will have it will need a sufficiently credible center, not 1 or 2% of GDP, it will be something bigger. So it's and that would be the question. And I'm genuinely open about that. People, first of all, I think people may change their mind. They might get scared, and I think it is scary. Some of those scenarios are pretty scary. So I think most people are conservative. They are risk averse. They don't say, oh, let's give up on the EU and let's have another, let's have a bit of action in a way we didn't have in the last 50 years. I don't think people would say that. So people might say risk averse. They say, okay, I work in a German export company, and what's going to happen if the euro disappears? What's going to happen to my job? And people might just then, when it comes to their own, when they look at their own situation, they might judge it differently compared to the situation where now tabloid newspapers rip up some anti-Greek sentiment. That's pretty bad in Germany, especially. And from that sort of sentiment, you could easily say, oh no, we would probably vote against this. When the situation comes, it might be different. I think it's an open question. I also think the Greek referendum is an open question. We should not think that they could because the majorities, the polls are saying no. When they vote, it will be an existential question. It will be, it's different. Answering the polls is a question. Whether you say, I'm going to leave the eurozone, or I'm going to leave the EU, and we'll have a great civil war, or have political instability, we'll have to, we lose whatever we have. Would a lower middle class Greek want that? We'll see. But it's something that, I don't think we should take this for granted. So I think there are surprises to the upside. This is the nice thing I'm going to say. There are positive, democracy might deliver us a different result than what pundits like me and others are predicting. So there is a possibility. However, on the Greek referendum, I believe they need to renegotiate the deal to get to that part, and renegotiating the deal is going to be risky. My greatest concern about the eurozone crisis is that it is moving too fast. Political processes are, by definition, slow. The political leaders really don't have an understanding. This is probably the most shocking realization that I have, is that they frame the world in a way that's very different from the way that you frame the world as investors. For them, they look at things in domestic political terms. Merkel looks at this and frustrates the chicanery with her party, what is possible in the legal environment. There isn't anyone close to her, but I think there isn't anyone in the 500-mile radius of Berlin who has a deep understanding of global financial markets. So many of the decisions, when these people say, let's have a voluntary haircut of 50%, they actually say that with a straight face. And that's something, we need a great deal of ignorance to be able to do that. And that's actually something that always never ceases to amaze me. And politics, at every time in this crisis they were behind the curve. They still are. People talk about comprehensive packages, and the markets get euphoric as they did on Thursday last week. On Friday it was already not doubtful whether this was such a great deal. No, we know pretty much all elements of this deal are falling apart. They are insufficient. We already talked about the next stages. All but hasn't even been agreed. Hasn't been ratified by Parliament. They still need to go through. They've just ratified the changes they agreed in July, which were completely irrelevant to the crisis as we have at the moment. The crisis is moving too fast for the politics. Now, I have some slides here on the German on the legal constraints. The German legal constraints are real. They are underestimated, and people think, so mostly on economic and financial grounds, tend to brush these things aside and say, okay, let the ECB monetize the debt, let's have a fiscal union. Those legal constraints are just ultimately, they're not going to go for it. I can assure you they're real, they are really serious. A lot of promises were made. The euro is a kind of social contract, but also a treaty, an international treaty. Lots of things were put into this treaty. A lot of the language is clear that the ECB start to monetize debt isn't the small print. This is a very clear commitment made at the time. That there can be no doubt about the intention of the various treaty clauses related to the ECB. No constitutional judge would interpret that in any other way. So if the EFSF, if we move to joint and several liability, if the EFSF were to get a banking license, if the ECB started to expand its securities market program, I can assure you there will be a legal challenge, and I can assure you that legal challenge will be credible. and there may be legal upsets to the system. We haven't had that so far. The German Constitutional Court has said no so far to anything, but they will. We have, as one German commentator put it, we have reached the limits of what the German Constitution can do. This is not just a political system. This is the limit of what the German Constitution can do. It cannot go a lot further than what we have now. Even the ESM, which is the successor to the EFSF, is not clear that it is within the German Constitution. It's certainly borderline. That's the best thing you could say in legal terms. It's in a grey area, and the court's opinion may just wave it through. I'm not even sure about that. But any of the things that are really necessary to solve the crisis, and these are, we're talking still about things that are not solving the crisis. The things that are needed to solve it will, in my view, and that of many German lawyers, be not possible. I won't bore you with the quote, but it's basically saying that the sovereignty cannot be shared. I think I have sovereignty cannot be shared. It has to rest in one place, and that means that the German Parliament must at all times be completely sovereign of its decision. It cannot bind its successor. It cannot give out guarantees that are basically triggered by actions outside their own jurisdiction. Basically, you can give money to Greece, okay, but you can't create a euro. That's essentially what they say. You can't create institutions that issue money, that issue liabilities. So everything the EFSF does has to go through the Bundestag, and they set up a secret committee so that this thing is basically just a formality, and the constitutional court said, no, you can't do this. It has to be a proper vote. So when EFSF has to intervene in secondary markets, it actually has to go to the Bundestag, tell them in public, they have a public hearing of whether they shall buy certain bonds to stabilize the financial markets. They can take a vote on that, and then the EFSF can buy and stabilize the markets. That is the procedure as of now. Basically, this procedure essentially makes it impossible for the EFSF to conduct secondary market purchases. It also tells us what the problem of fiscal and monetary policy. The court says fiscal policy is democratic. If you want to basically stabilize bond markets, it's not the role of fiscal policy. So there is a sort of, I actually have some sympathy with the court's using, not on economic grounds, but on constitutional grounds. Fiscal policy should be a process subject to open democracy. Now, I've mentioned that the obstacles to fiscal union before. So what's the likely outcome? I wrote this 2 days ago, so this is obviously out of date, given the speed by which the crisis is proceeding. But not all is wrong. The 50% voluntary haircut is unrealistic. Agreed. 60–70% haircut will follow, possibly more. I think, if I were Greek, I would say let's do something that would assure us that would give us something that would work. Having another sort of compromise that that wouldn't work in the end means that we have to go through this again. So let's give us a big haircut, something that stabilizes our debt to GDP at 80%, in return for which we're going to do all these changes that we need to make. But we can only make this sacrifice politically if at the end of that process there is a realistic trajectory of sustainability. If that isn't the case, and they won't get the message. So a big haircut, I think, is likely. If this goes wrong, there is a possibility that Greece might exit the eurozone. Still not my main scenario, because I cannot see it in the interest of Greece. But a political accident, as you've seen, President Papandreou for referendum, not having consulted with anyone. Sarkozy, he heard it on the news from the newswires. He went completely ballistic. Then he tried to call him, and he couldn't get through on the telephone. That's something, they're not used, and these are sort of accidents that happen. They're going to meet again. They have a crisis meeting in Cannes today, and they will tomorrow. They're going to sort this out among themselves. They will put pressure on him to have the referendum early. He will probably explain to them that the situation is serious. They will probably understand him, because they're politicians too. They're certainly open to political ideas. But that doesn't change the fact that the situation has become much more difficult today than it was last year. The EFSF leverage will go ahead, but with difficulty, and I don't think it will be a success. The program will work, they will get their investments, but it will not reduce interest rates sufficiently. The ECB debate will resurface on backstopping the fund will resurface in the context of the ESM. The pressure will grow in the next few weeks for that to happen. That's some sort of a debate you should be expecting. I would also expect the ESM to be early introduced. That's something institutionally I would expect. France could lose its AAA rating as an event. I would think there's going to be a political crisis in Italy. This is the last point is the bifurcation point. And also, I think we should think of when we're going to see a spread of the crisis to Portugal. I think it's very likely that we're going to see the spread of the crisis to Portugal. Possibly Ireland. Ireland is, I have to say, such a small country. Small things can change in Ireland, but a contagion is very likely. We've seen some stress in the banks. The banking sector is the likely trigger for any sort of serious problems as people move their money out of the banks. That's what's going to happen as the process is taking too slow to resolve. So we will come to this point, this bifurcation point, where we will have to go in one direction or the other, and there isn't a plan. I can assure you there is nobody in the eurozone who has a plan. And there is a genuine open possibility that it might go wrong. But the point is not so much that this will end in a catastrophe. There are, even if Greece stays inside the eurozone, there is significant potential, and the eurozone will survive. There's significant potential for financial stability and distress, cardiac arrest and economic activity because of some financial shock. Then if Greece were to leave the eurozone. So there are various propagation channels of catastrophe, while the channel that would sort of look at some kind of sustainable eurozone where the crisis is resolved, that's actually, without any stress, that's actually a low probability event. Thank you very much.
Time, I'm just overwhelmed with questions here. This is an investor lunch, so it's not surprising they're asking you to be a bit more specific about certain probabilities. And you speak as though okay outcomes are less likely than catastrophe outcomes. Is that about right?
Well, let's just be more precise. Catastrophe outcome, I mean, you could see the most catastrophic outcome being, a war in Europe. I think that probability is very low. You have very sort of intermediate outcomes, like localized military conflicts or something. But you could then have outcomes where we would have the eurozone dissolved. You would have outcomes where the eurozone continued to exist with fewer members. You could have outcomes where one or two countries leave the eurozone. You could even have negative outcomes where the eurozone stays together. With financial instability inside the eurozone and a never-ending crisis. So what has to be, there are so many scenarios that we would probably associate with a negative value. But what I am saying is that the outcome where we stay together and have financial stability and a reasonable growth projection of the world, that outcome without doing fiscal union, without having these fundamental changes, that probability is extremely small.
And our focus is so much really at the moment on the next 12 months. So I'm just struck by a question that's just come in, which is how does the eurozone look like in 2015?
2015. So it's not 12 months. 5 years.
So looking out for
in 5 years. Okay, let's. I suspect in 5 years, if I had to bet, Greece would still remember. Greece will have defaulted by then. We will either, but again, bifurcation point will come before, so it will come next year. So if we decide to stay with it, then we must be well on the way to a discussion on fiscal union. That must by then, be a firm project with a goal established. If that isn't the case, we will have a reduced eurozone that would probably not include Italy.
We've had one or two things come up with Portugal and indeed France today, and I think it'd just be interesting to hear your thoughts about what might be developing in both of those countries.
Well, the difficulty in Portugal is, remember in Greece last year when Papandreou, a year and a half, when Papandreou got elected, there was an euphoria, people were with him, his opinion, his elections were high, public supported him. And you know, everyone marveled at the Greek discipline and you know, the acceptance of austerity. They were really willing to do this. And everyone said, Papandreou, our man is our man. And a year and a half later, we have a situation which is close to civil war. What happened last weekend? They almost chased the president out of the country. The country is no longer cohesive. So we're really at the edge. Portugal is where Greece was a year and a half ago. They've got a new government. The government comes in with a mandate. These guys are fresh. They are determined. They're conservatives. They're very determined to get these things done. They know what they're doing. The finance minister, who might know well, very competent man. They're real experts. They're much more about how to do this than many of the larger countries. But the point is that Portugal has a recession this year. Will have a recession next year. Almost certainly bigger than anyone expects. They will have to do more than they promised. They will have to do a lot more. It will be politically much more controversial than it is now. And it's going to be a very difficult year. We're going to see a very similar situation in Portugal where they say that's default. But then Greece will have default. And the temptation for Portugal will be to do the same. And banks are already looking at Portugal in the way they look at Greece. In fact, one big German bank having the immediate reaction of the last week's summit was to reduce their Portuguese holdings because they realized that even though the EU leaders promised that the Greek haircut was unique to Greece, it won't be applied to any country. But what are these promises worth? They promised that the 21% voluntary haircut was the end of the debate of the PSI, and now we have a 50% thing, and there'll be an 80%, and there'll be Portuguese. So there is no credibility that this process will stop, and people are going to deal with the consequences. For France, what I think is going to happen, it's hard. Having been a political observer for a long time, it's hard to predict elections. You look at opinion polls and informed opinion will tell you that Sarkozy has no chance of winning the next election. I'll be very careful with my judgment because A is a very good campaigner. Things can change in a year. 4 months ago, we would have had Dominique Strauss-Kahn as the most likely president of France. Great things have happened. So it's very hard to make a judgment on the basis of polls. He is not very popular. He has lost a lot of capital among his core supporters. He was very much a president campaign for reform who didn't deliver a lot of his reforms. His hyperactivity has certainly not endeared him to many people in this country. So there are, he is in trouble. There's no question that as a president, as a politician, he's not in a position where ideally he wants to be a year, 6 months before an election. That's not a good starting point. This is clear. And the challenger has a chance. He is a serious challenger. François Hollande is a serious politician who, is a good campaigner too. So yeah, he'll be a better campaigner than his former wife last time. So I would assume that will be a serious challenge. But it's very hard to predict. No matter what happens, France will have to do things that neither of them is likely to promise. I'm talking about fiscal consolidation. But this isn't just fiscal consolidation in the sense of austerity. France has the reform of the French public sector is a big structural issue. A lot of this public sector is very large. A lot of employment is tied up in the public sector. So this goes really to the core of political support. This isn't your 10% across the board cut of income. So basically, this is a structural reform of massive political significance that whoever makes it is going to basically make that person very unpopular. And that's the reason why Sarkozy didn't push that. He just basically just tried to make it. It's very clear about that. He wasn't able to do it at the time. He had other priorities. So I can see that this is going to be difficult. The loss of the AAA rating is likely in that process. America has lost its AAA rating with one of the agencies. France couldn't have France. I think it's the economy is going to sink next year, let alone it's going to be enough. They wasn't able to get the debt break, the debt zero debt policy through the Constitution, because the Socialists blocked it in the Senate. That means the rating. I don't believe in these debt breaks, in these constitutional zero deficit arrangements. But the rating agencies do, and that's why they say they already threaten if it doesn't get through, it would be negative for the French outlook. So a lot of things are not looking good for France. So I think they're likely to lose the AAA rating. It's not a big deal as such, except that so much else follows from the loss of the AAA rating in terms of the yields and other things, because we have a system that's the way we constructed it with our sort of intergovernmental liabilities. Moving to joint and several liability would end it. We wouldn't have that problem, but we do not.
A couple of investor questions. In Greece, why is the solution without a CDS event, as in the voluntary haircut, preferred? And related to that is the CDS market still credible as we've introduced this new voluntary haircut?
Well, the second is a very good question. But the way this works, I asked myself, mostly the banks would rather have a forced than involuntary because they get some insurance. The way this seemed to work at the summit is that Sarkozy and Merkel walked into those negotiations and said, but you can accept a voluntary haircut of 50%, or we're going to wipe you out. It's not 60%, we're going to completely wipe you out. And you're going to be, you're going to see a retribution against the banks. Basically, there are protests against the banks. We will join those protests. You'll be in so much trouble. This was a genuine hard threat. So this wasn't not a purely economic argument for the banks to say instead of voluntary 50% haircut. They are threatened. They are going to live with this. 50% haircut. Banks might participate in banks in the IIF, not just a joke to accept the voluntary haircut. So many investors know it won't come to them. Some is very plausible that they will get this deal. I suspect, could you get the? I'm not a market expert, so I cannot say whether you could get the ISTA to collude here and basically declare this to be voluntary when it isn't. I don't think that is possible. I think that they will ultimately have the contracts, and if you are a fund and they cut you 50%, then this is an involuntary haircut, and CDS will be triggered. I think that's very likely to happen. All they were saying is, if it is voluntary, I think they were just stating the legal position as it is. If it is genuinely voluntary, voluntary. But I mean, can such a haircut of such massive size be genuinely voluntary? Can that be delivered and be effective?
A couple of longer range ones. Does saving the euro imply killing the union? So that's obviously the sort of UK-Sweden issue. How practical is a fiscal union for countries with significantly different tax systems?
First question is I wrote about that subject about the implications for the non-eurozone EU. And again, here we have to look at scenarios. Obviously, if the eurozone breaks up or if something really awful happens, we have other problems than dealing with the relation between eurozone and non-eurozone. We have to keep that whole thing together. The separation don't exist. So my assumption was always that the eurozone will get through this intact as one piece. And then the question is, but in doing so, it will have to form a fiscal union. It will have to have things we basically say are critical and realistic, like tax base, tax mess, corporate taxes, and various kind of taxes that have joint banking supervision. Can you see the British accepting all these things that have been basically railing against this forever? Again, it's not the single market. The eurozone doesn't need a single market. The eurozone needs an economics industry. These are very different things. This is a macroeconomic unit. The EU is not a macroeconomic unit. It's a microeconomic. It's about market integration. It's a completely different philosophy that stands behind it. And in every speech, people always say the single market is a wonderful thing, etc. But for the eurozone, it is not only not enough. It's kind of the wrong things, because for a monetary union, the kind of market integration needs some labor market integration. That's kind of outside the system. We need to have a single financial sector. where the risk is not in some local unit in some country, but where the risk is basically local. These are the things that the single market isn't doing, so the eurozone means something else. What I'm saying in the argument was that it's not just the interests of one are different from the others, that is true, but that as the eurozone develops its crisis, it will look at the EU with some alienation. And as the non-eurozone stays out of the euro, it will look at the eurozone with some alienation, because these two sides will basically different. The second question was the fiscal policy for different ages. You have to forge it. I mean, that's right. Different tax systems. You have to basically, in such a union, you could maintain different tax systems. But the problem isn't different tax systems. The problem is the fact that there isn't any joint tax system. So you would basically, you would just need a corporation tax would be the logical one. And income taxes would still be countries would still be able to make different income taxes. VAT is largely harmonized across the EU. There are different rates, as there are in US tests. There's no need to have one rate. Countries can have different rates up to them within a certain band. I think that's fairly sensible. Otherwise, you get a lot of distortion. That's how this would work. Would Ireland participate? Probably not. What choice do they have? So.
Let's finish with just two quick ones. I quite like this one. Hank Wilson said, if people know you have a bazooka, you probably won't need to use it. So is there anyone with that bazooka in Europe? And if yes, who and what kind of bazooka?
Well, the only people with a bazooka, there are two bazookas you could think of. One is the ultimate infinite bazooka is the central bank. It's the only agency that can create money. Well, the eurozone has its own, it has a current account surplus. It's not dependent on outside funding. The ECB is in a position to print as much money as it wants. As I said, there are legal constraints, political constraints and legal constraints that prevent it from doing so. But that is the only agency that has the bazooka. And secondly, you could basically move from national liability to a separate liability to joint and separate liability for bond markets. And while that is not a bazooka, it basically is a very strong statement to say that we share the EU is basically this is our sovereign bond market, and our treasuries, our eurozone treasuries are as risk-free as US treasuries. We stand fully behind it, and ECB stands fully behind it. This is, we will not allow anything to happen. There is no reform. We're not going to. There's no PSI discussion. If that's a kind of the bazooka that you use, a kind of political commitment statement, which is very different from the statement that we have now. To say is that these bonds are it's the investor's responsibility to see how risky they are. And if only German bonds are risk-free or considered risk-free, that's not good enough for monetary union.
And one last investor question. Given all this bad news, where does the investor says hide to get a return? I'll just say go to get a return.
Well, I'm notoriously bad at giving this type of advice. I've invited I thought in '99 that the euro would strengthen, and so I've made many errors. But I would probably say that I would think that given the risk, I think that risky assets will not be a great investment shares in the next in the immediate horizon. Should the ECB, however, take that role ultimately and do this, I think one could see some strong equity market gains. I would very much expect that. But I suspect it's a fairly safe investment at the moment. And I think that no one can ever go wrong with this. Things like German property be very hard. There's a bit of a boom going on now, but nothing like we've seen in the last decade. That seems a fairly safe and risk-free and decent investment. But I'd be very cautious.
All right, thank you, Wolfgang, for keeping everyone here and alert.